There's something deeply confusing about missing someone who hurt you. You know what they did. You remember the lies, the reversals, the moments where you felt small or invisible or like you were losing your mind. You've probably replayed it all more times than you can count. And still, you miss them, not just occasionally, acutely, in a way that doesn't make sense given everything you know. That contradiction is what this video is about, not the person, not what they did, but the psychological mechanism that explains why missing someone and knowing they were bad for you can coexist so completely, and why that coexistence is so hard to shake. Because here's the thing most people get wrong. They think missing someone is about the person. It's not. It's about what the relationship did to your brain. Let's start with something that sounds counterintuitive. The more inconsistent a source of reward is, the stronger the attachment it creates. This isn't a theory. It's one of the most replicated findings in behavioral psychology. It's called intermittent reinforcement, and it doesn't just work on lab animals. It works on humans in relationships, in ways most people never fully recognize. Intermittent reinforcement means reward comes unpredictably. Sometimes you get warmth, closeness, approval, affection. Sometimes you get coldness, criticism, silence, confusion. And the critical part, you can never fully predict which one you'll get or why. When rewards come unpredictably, the brain doesn't disengage. It does the opposite. It fixates. It becomes hypervigilant. It starts scanning constantly for clues about when the reward will come next. It invests more energy, more attention, more emotional labor, not less, into chasing the inconsistent source. This is not weakness. This is your brain functioning exactly as designed in an environment that was rigged to create attachment. And in a relationship where someone alternates between making you feel seen and making you feel invisible, between pulling you in and pushing you away, your brain goes through this cycle thousands of times. Every repair after a rupture trains you to wait for the next repair. Every good moment becomes evidence that the good version of this person is the real one. Every bad moment becomes a puzzle to solve rather than information to act on. By the time the relationship ends, you're not just missing the person, you're missing the relief, the hit of warmth after a long, cold spell. The moment when it finally felt good again. That's what your brain learned to crave. And it doesn't stop craving it just because the relationship is over. Now here's where it gets more precise. What manipulation specifically does, and this is important, is that it doesn't just create inconsistency. It creates a very particular kind of confusion about cause and effect. In a healthy dynamic, you can generally understand why things shift. There's disagreement, there's repair, there's explanation. The emotional logic makes sense even when things are difficult. In a manipulative dynamic, the logic is deliberately distorted. You're told your perception is wrong. You're told you caused the coldness that seems to have no origin. You're given affection in response to compliance and withdrawal, in response to autonomy. The signals don't match reality, and over time, your ability to trust your own reading of situations gets quietly eroded. This is what's often called gaslighting, though the mechanism behind it is broader than that term sometimes captures. What it actually does is create a state of chronic self-doubt. You stop relying on your own interpretation of events. You start outsourcing your sense of reality to the relationship itself. And when that relationship ends, you don't just lose the person. You lose the external reference point you'd started depending on to understand what was real. That's a particular kind of disorientation. It doesn't feel like grief exactly. It feels like being unmoored, like a question with no answer left open in the middle of your mind. Missing them in this context is partly the brain trying to close the loop, trying to go back and finally understand what happened, trying to get the answer the relationship never gave. There's a concept in psychology called a trauma bond. It's important to understand what this actually means because it gets misused. A trauma bond isn't just emotional dependence. It's a specific pattern where the cycle of harm and repair becomes the structure of the attachment itself. The intensity created by the ruptures, the anxiety, the hypervigilance, the emotional spikes, becomes fused with the experience of closeness. So the relationship doesn't just feel intense, it feels significant. It feels like the most real thing that happened to you, because neurologically it was. The emotional activation was enormous, the stakes felt constantly high, the repair moments when they came felt like profound relief rather than ordinary connection. Intensity is not depth, but it feels like depth. This is one of the most important distinctions in understanding why these attachments are so difficult to leave and even harder to stop missing. The brain codes high-intensity experiences as meaningful. It stores them differently. It returns to them more often. And so you'll find yourself thinking about this person, about specific moments, about the way things felt during the good stretches, with a vividness that quieter, healthier relationships often don't produce. That vividness is not evidence of love. It's evidence of neurological intensity. Those are not the same thing. If you're recognizing any of this, it might be worth pausing here. If you've been trying to make sense of why you can't stop thinking about someone you know wasn't good for you, this is the mechanism, not a flaw in your character, a pattern in how attachment forms under specific conditions. If you found this useful, it might be worth subscribing. More conversations like this one come out regularly, and I'd genuinely be curious what resonated most for you. Leave it in the comments. There's another layer to this that often goes unexamined. When someone manipulates you, they often do it through a specific sequence. Idealization first, then erosion. At the beginning, there's often an unusually intense period of closeness, of feeling uniquely understood, of being told, explicitly or implicitly, that you are special to this person in a way that matters. Psychologists sometimes call this love bombing, but again, the label matters less than the mechanism. What's happening is that a version of you is being reflected back, an idealized version, a version that is wanted and chosen and deeply seen. And humans are not neutral about that experience. Being seen and wanted at that level activates something fundamental. It doesn't feel like ordinary affection. It feels like recognition, like finally being known. When the relationship shifts, when the coldness comes, when the criticism starts, when the idealization disappears, what you lose isn't just the person. You lose that version of yourself that existed in their eyes, the one that was enough, the one that was chosen. Missing the relationship, then, is partly grief about that version of yourself, the one you were when it was good. And the difficulty in moving on is sometimes less about the person and more about the absence of that reflected self. This is why no contact alone isn't always enough to heal the attachment, because the wound isn't just relational, it's also about selfhood, about what it felt like to be that version of you and the disorientation of not having that mirror anymore. There's a social layer to this too that's worth naming. We live in a culture that systematically conflates emotional intensity with love. We treat the ability to make you feel something, even something destabilizing, as evidence of depth. We romanticize the push-pull. We frame volatility as passion. We tell stories endlessly about the person who made everything complicated and how that complication was proof that what they felt was real. So when you come out of a manipulative relationship, you're not just dealing with your own neurological patterns, you're dealing with a cultural story that validates those patterns, that tells you the pain means it mattered, that missing someone this much is proof the love was real. It's not. Pain doesn't validate love. Intensity doesn't confirm meaning. The fact that something was difficult and consuming and hard to leave does not mean it was good for you or true. These two things have nothing to do with each other, and separating them, actually internalizing the separation, not just understanding it intellectually, is one of the harder pieces of work in recovering from this kind of relationship. One more thing that rarely gets said clearly enough: the yearning you feel isn't always for the person as they actually were. It's often for the person you believed they could be, the version they showed you during the good stretches, the potential you saw and maybe tried for a long time to draw out. When a relationship ends without that potential ever being realized, the grief is strange. You're mourning something that never fully existed, a future that didn't happen, a version of a person that may never have been real, or may have been real only briefly and selectively. That kind of grief has no clean object. There's no clear story of what you lost, because what you lost was partly a projection. And projections are hard to mourn because they don't have edges. They don't resolve the way a concrete loss resolves. This is why people in this situation often stay stuck longer than they expect. Not because they're weak, not because they secretly want to go back, but because the grief doesn't have a shape they can get hold of. They're reaching for something to grieve and finding that what they're reaching for keeps shifting. Let's bring this together. What you're dealing with when you miss someone who manipulated you is not one thing. It's a layered architecture of psychological effects. There's the intermittent reinforcement loop, a brain trained to crave the unpredictable reward. There's the self-doubt left behind when someone gradually eroded your ability to trust your own perception. There's the trauma bond, where the cycle of rupture and repair became the structure of the attachment itself, so intensity got coded as meaning. There's the loss of an idealized self, the version of you that existed in their eyes during the good phase. There's the cultural script that tells you all of this pain is proof that it was real. And there's the unresolvable grief for a potential that never became actual. Any one of these would be difficult on its own. Together, they explain why this particular kind of missing is so persistent, so confusing, and so resistant to simple, rational intervention. You can know exactly what someone did to you and still feel the pull. That's not contradiction, that's neurology. Understanding this changes something important about how you interpret what you're feeling. When you miss this person, you're not necessarily missing them. You're missing the chemical state the relationship produced, the intensity, the relief when the tension finally broke, the version of yourself that existed during the good periods. The answer to questions the relationship left permanently open. That's worth knowing. Not because knowing it makes the feeling stop. It won't immediately. But because it changes where you're looking. Instead of trying to understand the person, you can start to understand the pattern. Instead of asking what was wrong with them, you can ask what was happening in you. What need was being activated? What part of you got hooked? And why? The shift from analyzing them to understanding yourself is where the real movement happens. Not as self-blame, not as therapy speak, but as a genuine reorientation of attention. You're not confused because they were complicated. You're attached because the conditions were precisely the kind that create attachment. You were not naive. You were human, responding in a deeply human way to a specific and powerful set of psychological triggers. The bond was real. The pain is real. The missing is real. What wasn't real was the version of the relationship you were holding on to, the one where the good moments represented the truth and the bad moments were exceptions to be explained away. Once that distinction is clear, once you can see the mechanism behind the feeling doesn't disappear, but it loses some of its authority. It becomes information rather than instruction, something to observe rather than obey. And that's a meaningful shift, not a cure, not a resolution, but a different relationship with what you're feeling, one where you're no longer being carried by it without knowing why. If this conversation meant something to you, if something here finally put words to a feeling you've been carrying, then you already know this kind of clarity is rare. Most of what you'll find out there tells you what to do. This channel is about understanding why you feel what you feel, why certain patterns repeat, why knowing something and feeling it are two completely different things. That distinction matters, and if it matters to you too, subscribe. Not because the algorithm needs it, but because these conversations keep going, and the next one might be exactly what you need to hear. Leave a comment below. Tell me what landed. Tell me what you're still sitting with. I read them, and more often than not, your questions shape what comes next. This channel exists because people like you show up and pay attention. So, see you in the next one.